Imagine this. You're sipping your morning coffee when suddenly there's violent pounding on your front door. Two so-called police officers yell that you're under arrest, not for breaking the law, but for violating HOA rules. They flash fake badges, try to slap cuffs on you, and the whole neighborhood is watching. But here's the twist. What they don't know is you're actually the chief of police. And in the next few minutes, their little charade is about to blow up in their faces. Open up. Police. Those words crashed through the silence of my peaceful Saturday morning like a hammer striking glass. I had just poured myself a steaming cup of coffee, ready to enjoy the quiet comfort of my living room, when the pounding on my front door started. It wasn't a casual knock. It was aggressive, loud, and demanding. The kind of knock that makes your stomach twist before your mind even knows why. My neighborhood is usually calm. The kind of place where the loudest noise you hear on a weekend morning is someone mowing their lawn or kids riding bikes down the street. So hearing someone hammering at my door before I'd even had my first sip of coffee was jarring. I froze for a moment listening, hoping maybe I had imagined it. But then the voice boomed again. This is the police. Open the door immediately. My instincts kicked in. Something felt wrong. I've worked around law enforcement my entire adult life. And even without thinking, I knew that this didn't sound right. The tone was off, less professional, more like some wannabe tough guy trying too hard to sound official. Slowly, I walked to the window beside the door and pulled the curtain back, just enough to peek outside. What I saw made my blood run cold. Two men stood there in matching uniforms, but their outfits looked like something ordered off the internet, not issued by any real department. Their badges, if you could even call them that, didn't glint like real metal. They looked flat, dull, almost like cheap toys. Their belts were too loose, their holsters didn't quite fit, and the patches on their sleeves didn't match any local insignia I'd ever seen. Immediately, alarms were ringing in my head. These guys weren't police officers. They were pretending. Before I could open the door or even process what was happening, one of them stepped forward, puffing out his chest, and shouted again, "You are under arrest for violating HOA rules." I almost dropped my coffee mug. HOA rules? Arrested? The words didn't even belong in the same sentence. Homeowners associations can send letters. They can fine you. They can nag you endlessly about the length of your grass or the color of your fence. But arrest you? No. That was pure nonsense. For months, the HOA in my neighborhood had been riding me hard over the smallest things, telling me my American flag was too big, complaining that my work truck made the community look unprofessional, even leaving notes about my dog barking for a few minutes in the evening. It was harassment, plain and simple, but nothing I hadn't seen before. But this, sending so-called officers to my house, that was a whole new level of crazy. My heart pounded as I opened the door just a crack, enough to face them, but not enough to let them inside. I studied their faces. One was sweating, his eyes darting nervously around, while the other was trying too hard to look tough, gripping a clipboard in one hand as if it were some sort of official warrant. He waved it at me like it was supposed to scare me. From where I stood, I could see the paper wasn't even a real document. It looked like something printed on cheap copy paper. No letterhead, no seal, no signature. "Step outside immediately," one barked. "The HOA has authorized us to detain you until further notice." My jaw tightened. Authorized by the HOA. That wasn't just wrong, it was laughable. I didn't move. Instead, I let the silence hang in the air while my neighbors, now curious, began peeking from their blinds and porches, watching this strange scene unfold. And as ridiculous as it was, one thought kept circling in my mind. If these men were bold enough to fake being officers, then this wasn't just a prank or a misunderstanding. This was intimidation. This was the HOA trying to scare me into submission. What they didn't realize, though, was that they had picked the absolute worst person in the world to try and intimidate, because the man they were threatening to arrest was the actual chief of police. The two men didn't waste time. As soon as I opened the door a little wider, they pushed forward, trying to loom over me like they were in control of the situation. Their fake uniforms creased awkwardly as they moved, and one of them raised a clipboard in his hand as if it were some sort of sacred authority, waving it so close to my face that I could smell the cheap ink still fresh on the paper. It wasn't a warrant. It wasn't even a believable copy of one. The font looked wrong, the seal was blurry, and there were spelling mistakes scattered across the page. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud at the sheer ridiculousness of it. But the man holding it wasn't smiling. His face was set in a hard frown, his jaw stiff, as he barked out orders. "Step outside, sir. You are being detained until further notice. The HOA has authorized this arrest." The words rolled off his tongue like he'd been rehearsing them, but his voice cracked at the end, betraying his nerves. His partner stood a little behind him, puffing his chest out like a child playing dress-up, clearly trying to look intimidating for the neighbors who had started to peek out from behind their curtains. I could see Mrs. Henderson across the street holding her phone at her chest, pretending to check messages, while her eyes darted between me and the men on my porch. Mr. Clark, next door, had opened his blinds just enough for me to catch his pale face watching, his expression caught somewhere between amusement and disbelief. I turned back to the two fake officers, shaking my head slowly. "Arrests don't come from HOAs," I said, my voice calm, low, controlled. "They come from the law. And whatever this is, it isn't law." My words seemed to rattle them, but instead of backing down, they doubled down. The one with the clipboard jabbed it at me, stepping closer. "We don't have to explain ourselves to you. You're in violation of multiple HOA rules, and we've been instructed to take you in until the board decides your punishment." His partner fumbled at his belt and pulled out what he must have thought would seal the deal, a pair of handcuffs. But they weren't even metal. They were flimsy, plastic training cuffs, the kind you could buy in bulk online for a kid's costume party. He tried to grab my wrist with them, his hand trembling slightly as if he wasn't sure he'd be able to go through with it. That was the moment I realized exactly what was going on. This wasn't some random act of stupidity. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a performance, a staged spectacle meant to humiliate me in front of the entire neighborhood. They wanted the sight of me being arrested to spread like wildfire, to plant fear in anyone else who dared to stand up to the HOA. It was intimidation by theater, nothing more. But in their arrogance, they had crossed a line they could never uncross. I let him try, let him press the cheap plastic against my wrist, and for a brief second, I even considered letting them finish, just to see how far they would go before they broke. But the anger building inside me was too strong to ignore. These men weren't just insulting me. They were insulting the badge, the uniform, and every real officer who had ever put their life on the line to protect this community. My eyes narrowed, and I straightened to my full height, towering over them both. The neighborhood might have seen just a homeowner being harassed, but what these imposters didn't realize was that I wasn't just another name on their HOA complaint list. I wasn't just a man they could bully into silence. I was the chief of police of this very city, the one person they should have thought twice about targeting, because if there was one thing I couldn't stand, it was someone trying to fake the authority I had sworn my life to uphold. I decided in that moment that if these men wanted a show, I was going to give them one, but it wasn't going to end the way they had imagined. I took a deep breath, kept my tone calm, and asked the kind of question that always rattles imposters. "Do you mind showing me your police IDs and badge numbers? I'll need them for my report." It was like dropping a stone in still water. The ripple of panic was instant. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that tiny exchange, I could see everything: hesitation, fear, and the dawning realization that their little charade was about to collapse. The taller one stammered, "We don't need to show you that. The HOA is in charge here." His words came out sharp, but his voice betrayed him with a crack halfway through, the confidence slipping like sand through his fingers. I let a slow smile creep across my face, the kind of smile that says I already know the ending to a story someone else is trying to write. Without another word, I stepped back into the house, leaving them standing there awkwardly on my porch. I could hear their whispers, confused, nervous, trying to decide if they should leave or push harder. Then, seconds later, I came back, but this time I wasn't empty-handed. In my right hand, the morning sun caught the glint of pure authority, my real badge, polished gold, engraved with the words that carried more weight than any flimsy costume or fake paper ever could: Chief of Police. The look on their faces was worth more than 1,000 words. The tough guy's jaw dropped so fast I thought it might hit the ground, and his partner actually took a step back, his hand falling away from the plastic cuffs like they had burned him. I raised the badge high, letting the neighbors, still watching from windows and porches, see exactly who I was. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice now firm and commanding, every syllable slicing through the morning air. "You're impersonating law enforcement officers, and you're doing it in front of the chief of police." Gasps rippled through the neighborhood. Phones came up, recording, capturing the moment the hunters realized they had just walked into the trap of their own making. The clipboard shook in the taller man's hand before it slipped from his grasp and hit the ground with a pathetic thud, the worthless piece of paper fluttering across my porch like trash in the wind. The shorter one muttered something about a mistake, but his voice was too quiet, too broken, to mean anything. I didn't give him time to recover. I pulled my radio from my belt, the familiar static crackling to life as I called in backup. "This is Chief Reynolds. I've got 2 suspects impersonating officers at my residence. Send units immediately." Their eyes widened at the sound of my voice speaking into the real police radio, the kind only true officers carry. Seconds ticked by, and then, in the distance, the rising wail of sirens cut through the morning stillness like the sound of approaching justice. Red and blue lights painted the street as squad cars pulled in from both ends of the block, engines rumbling, tires crunching against the pavement. Neighbors poured out of their houses now, no longer hiding, eager to witness the downfall of the men who had tried to stage my humiliation. Officers poured out of the cars, hands on holsters, expressions hard and ready for business. The 2 imposters froze, cornered, their fake confidence stripped away. And as they stood there trembling, surrounded by real officers with real authority, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction settle over me. The show was over, and the curtain had dropped, but this time, the audience wasn't laughing at me. They were laughing at the fools who thought they could outplay the chief of police in his own city. The fake officers didn't last 5 minutes under questioning. Once the squad cars boxed them in and my men took over, their thin wall of bravado cracked like brittle glass. At first, they mumbled excuses. "We were just following orders." This was all a misunderstanding. But when the cuffs clicked shut on their wrists, the truth came pouring out in panic bursts. They admitted the unthinkable. The entire charade had been orchestrated by the HOA president herself, a woman who had been terrorizing this neighborhood for years with fines, threats, and endless letters designed to make homeowners feel like criminals for simply living their lives. She had hired them, paid them cash from HOA funds, and told them to put on fake uniforms to make me look weak, humiliated, and powerless in front of everyone. The moment those words hit the air, the neighborhood erupted into whispers and gasps. People stepped out of their houses, not just to watch anymore, but to talk, to share, to finally unload the stories they had been carrying in silence. Mrs. Henderson crossed the street, clutching her phone, and told me how the HOA president had fined her nearly $500 because her garden hose was visible from the sidewalk. Mr. Clark, who had always kept to himself, admitted that he'd been threatened with legal action over a birdhouse his grandson had built him as a gift. One by one, my neighbors, people who had lived under the HOA's thumb, began to step forward, their voices trembling with anger and long-suppressed frustration. It was like the dam had broken, and years of fear came rushing out all at once. I listened carefully, filing every detail away, because I knew then and there this wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. This was about justice for an entire community that had been bullied into silence. I made the call to my detectives right there on my front lawn, instructing them to pull every financial record, every bank statement, every email tied to the HOA board. Within 48 hours, the investigation peeled back the polished surface of their so-called leadership and revealed the rot underneath. The HOA president had been siphoning funds for years, writing personal checks from the HOA account to pay for spa trips, luxury handbags, and even vacations overseas. She had created fake maintenance fees and security budgets that didn't exist, funneling the money into her own pockets. And those 2 imposters? They were part of her scheme. Paid actors dressed up to scare anyone who dared to push back. The evidence piled high, and with every new discovery, the neighborhood's outrage grew louder. The people who once whispered their complaints in fear were now standing tall, speaking openly, united in their anger. I could see the shift happening with my own eyes, a broken community beginning to heal as the truth came into the light. And when I stood before them, laying out the evidence we had uncovered, their faces reflected a mix of relief and righteous fury. They weren't just victims anymore. They were witnesses, ready to see justice served. That night, for the first time in years, the street felt alive again. Neighbors gathered outside, talking, laughing, finally free to breathe without the constant weight of the HOA president's threats pressing down on them. They knew she had gone too far, and they knew her downfall was only a matter of time. And deep down, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The reign of intimidation and corruption in our neighborhood was over. The day of reckoning came faster than anyone expected. Armed with the evidence my detectives had gathered and the testimonies of nearly every family in the neighborhood, we secured a warrant for the HOA president's arrest. It wasn't like the fake spectacle she had tried to stage with her hired imposters. This time, it was the real thing. The morning sky was still pale with dawn when the convoy of squad cars rolled down our street, engines humming low, red and blue lights flashing silently, as if to say justice was coming in quiet but certain steps. Neighbors poured out of their homes, gathering at their driveways, their faces lit with anticipation. The HOA president's house, once a fortress of arrogance where she had held her so-called board meetings, suddenly looked small, vulnerable, just another home on the block. When the officers knocked, she didn't answer. When they knocked again, louder, she peeked through the blinds, her face pale, her jaw trembling. But there was no escape. The order was lawful, the charges undeniable. Fraud, embezzlement, harassment, conspiracy, and worst of all, impersonating law enforcement by proxy. A felony that no judge was going to take lightly. The door opened slowly, and there she stood, no longer the untouchable tyrant of the HOA, but just a woman caught in her own web of lies. The neighbors who had once cowered under her rules now stood taller, watching, whispering, some even filming as the cuffs clicked onto her wrists. For once, she was the one being humiliated in public, her empire crumbling before the very people she had tormented. As she was led to the squad car, I caught her eyes. She tried to glare, to hold on to some shred of power, but it was gone. All I felt looking back at her was pity. Pity for someone who thought intimidation and control were stronger than truth and community. When the car pulled away, the cheer that erupted from my neighbors was unlike anything I had heard before. It wasn't the rowdy cheer of a sports game or the polite clap of a school play. It was raw, powerful, years of frustration finally released in a single moment of triumph. People hugged, laughed, even cried. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from every shoulder at once. And in that moment, I realized the deeper truth. It wasn't just about bringing one corrupt HOA president down. It was about reminding people that they had a voice, that they could stand up to abuse of power, and that when they stood together, no bully, no matter how powerful they seemed, could control them. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. We held a community vote and dissolved the corrupt HOA entirely, replacing it with a simple, transparent council run by honest neighbors who actually cared about improving the place, not controlling it. Gone were the pointless fines, the harassment, the endless threats. Instead, people started helping each other, trading tools, mowing lawns for the elderly, hosting block parties. The street that once felt divided and suffocated under fear now buzzed with life and laughter. For me, it was more than just another case closed. It was personal. It was proof that justice isn't just about arresting criminals. It's about restoring balance, giving people back their dignity, and making sure no one forgets that true authority is meant to protect, not to oppress. Standing on my porch weeks later, sipping my coffee in peace for the first time in months, I smiled as kids rode their bikes down the street and neighbors waved at me warmly. I thought back to that morning when fake officers tried to put me in plastic cuffs, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. They had tried to make me look powerless, but all they had done was give me the chance to expose the truth and empower the entire community. And that, to me, was the greatest victory of all. And that's how justice was finally served. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more shocking and powerful tales like this one, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. This is Bright Struggle, where we bring you real drama, real lessons, and stories you won't forget. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.